Please welcome Jonathan Ames.
Well, thank you all for coming. I know it's crowded, but I don't know if you can see me, but you'll certainly be able to hear me. And before I start, I really want to thank Jesse and Susan for putting this together. So thank you, Jesse and Susan. And, oh, that's a great idea. I was going to suggest it, but since everyone's shoes are, well, it's good that you're sitting down. And also, I just want to say about the Bushwick Book Club, I think it's so amazing that all these artists gather, and the way they talk about a book is to make art in response to it. And I wasn't fully aware, come on out, that there will be, I think, like 15 or 16 acts, and there will be an intermission in the middle, and you can buy the specialty drinks made also in response to the book. And if you know anything about the book, it's kind of, the idea would be perhaps to get hammered, but in a responsible way. And so I'm going to read from the book for a couple of minutes, and then I'll turn it over to the Bushwick Book Club. And maybe at the end, I'll come back on at the very end, and if there are any questions, perhaps I could answer them then, about life. But we'll see how it all plays out. And for those of you who know me, this isn't a comedic book at all, and so I'm used to reading funny things, so this is sort of a departure for me. And one final thought, I guess that's it. Yeah, it's dark, it's not funny. And so here's the title, You Were Never Really Here, and I'll be reading from the beginning of the book. Joe felt something behind him. It was the presence of life and the coming of violence. And that anticipation, that sensitivity, enabled him to turn in time and catch the blackjack on his shoulder, which was better than taking it on the back of his head. Also, it was his left shoulder, and Joe was right-handed. And turning around completely, he was able to grab the man's wrist before the blackjack came down again. And they were face to face, the same height, and Joe immediately drove his forehead like a brick into the bridge of the man's nose, shattering the bone. And the man, his eyes blinded by red pain, began to fall. And Joe brought up his knee, brought it up hard, without mercy, into the man's jaw, breaking it. The man went down completely, strings cut, lifeless but breathing. Joe quickly swung his head to the left and the right. He was in an alley wide enough for a car. He'd come out of his Flop Hotel service entrance in the middle of the passageway, and no one was walking by or had stopped at either end. No one had seen. There was streetlight coming from the avenue, but the alley was mostly in shadow. Joe wiggled his left arm, trying to get life into it. The blackjack had numbed the whole limb, and he dragged the body behind a dumpster and quickly went through the pockets of the light coat, a blue windbreaker. The fallen was a pro. No wallet, no ID, just keys and a money clip with about $200. But there was a cell phone, so he wasn't a total professional. He didn't anticipate losing, and he didn't anticipate being hunted like Joe did. Joe never carried a cell phone. Joe looked at the blackjack, police issue, probably a bent cop from the Cincinnati suburbs doing a little moonlighting in the big town where his face wasn't known. Whoever had sent him didn't want Joe dead. Not yet, anyway. They wanted to bring him in, talk to him. There was probably a partner waiting in a car, waiting for a call. Joe would have been spooked by a car in the alley, so this one had hidden in the cove of a doorway. He'd sap Joe and call his partner. They'd throw his body into the car and bring him to the boss. That had been the plan. It didn't work. Soon the one in the car would come looking. Joe didn't want any more fights, because you didn't win every fight. Joe figured they just wanted to know how he'd gotten to them and if others would follow, and then they would have killed him. But he didn't need to take them all out because they wanted information. He was just one man, not the complete arm of justice. I did enough, he thought. The girl is damaged, but free. So he ran the opposite way down the alley, darted his head out fast, looking to his left and right. There wasn't a third man guarding that end. Nobody sitting in a car, nobody planted in a doorway, trying not to look like a plant. He stepped out into the street, started to walk. It was late October, and there was a sweet smell in the air, like a flower that had just died. He thought about a time when he'd been happy. It had been more than 2 decades. Then Joe spotted a green cab. He liked the cabs in Cincy. The cars were old, and the drivers were old. It felt like the past. He got in. "Airport," he said, and he fingered the money clip. He'd give the driver a nice tip. It's the next morning. Joe lay in bed in his mother's house. He thought about committing suicide. Such thinking was like a metronome for him, always present, always ticking. All day long, every few minutes, he'd think, "I have to kill myself." But in the mornings and before going to bed, the thinking was more elaborate. He knew it was a waste of time. It was going to have to wait till his mother passed, but he couldn't stop. It was his favorite story, the only one he knew the ending of for sure. The past few weeks had always involved water. His plan of late was to slip into the Hudson at night during high tide by the Verrazano. The currents were strong, and he would be taken out to sea. He didn't want anyone to be bothered with the body. Once, when he first got out of the Marines, long before he'd gone back to live with his mother, he had nearly done it. He had been processed out of Marine Corps Base Quantico and ended up in a motel near Baltimore, drinking by himself for a few days and going to a movie theater, seeing the same 3 pictures over and over. Then one night in the motel, he had taken a lot of sleeping pills and wrapped his head in a few layers of black plastic bags, duct taping them around his neck. He felt himself diminishing, a shadow around the edges of his mind, and he heard a voice say, "It's all right, you can go, you were never really here." But then he clawed off the bags and pumped his own stomach. After that, the story never involved leaving a body behind, leaving a mess behind. That was shameful. When it was time to be removed, that's what it would be, a complete erasure. So the sea would have him. It wouldn't mind one more piece of waste. He had nowhere else to turn. He heard his mother downstairs and got out of bed. He did 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups, his morning ritual. That, walking a great deal, and squeezing a handball as often as possible was all he did for exercise. He especially liked his hands to be strong. It was good in a fight. You break your adversary's fingers, you have an immediate advantage. It frightened even the hardest men to have their fingers snapped, and in a fight, like a dance, you often held hands. So his hands were weapons, his whole body was a weapon, cruel like a baseball bat. 6'2", 190, no fat. He was 48, but his olive-colored skin was still smooth, which made him appear younger than he was. His jet black hair had receded at the temples, leaving a little wedge, like the point of a knife, at the front. He kept his hair at the length of a Marine on leave. He was half Irish, half Italian. He had a long, twisting Italian nose and eerie Gaelic blue eyes, set back and deep, Italian but for their color. It was a mournful face, a self-involved face, with a thick forehead, another weapon, and his jaw was too big and long, like the blade of a shovel. When he passed security cameras, he tucked it in. The black baseball hat he wore most of the time hid the rest of his face, which in its entirety was not ugly, but not handsome. It was something else. It was a mask he would tear off if he could. He was aware that he was not completely sane, so he kept himself in rigid check, playing both jailer and prisoner. He put on pants and a t-shirt and went down to the kitchen for breakfast. His mother sat in her chair by the window in her house dress and slippers, waiting for him, patient and still, intent only on watching the door for his arrival. His plate was set. She was 80, very short now, and had the look of a Mediterranean widow. In Genoa, where she was born, she'd be dressed in black, the widows there turning into nuns of a sort during the quiet, protracted ends of their lives. Her silver gray hair was piled in a knot on her head, and she wore large glasses that took up most of her sallow face, which was round and sad. Her hair, uncut for years when set free, reached all the way to her waist. Joe had seen her once in the bathroom in her house dress. The door was slightly ajar, and her head was in the sink. She was giving herself a shampoo. And then she had risen up and thrown her hair back like a young woman, and the hair snapped out in an arc like a long silvery rope. It struck him as magnificent. She had been beautiful once. She got up slowly to pour his coffee and make his eggs. Behind her glasses, she looked at him with love, a slight flicker in her eyes, but she didn't smile. That look was the only joy in his life, and her only joy as well. They hardly ever spoke. So I'm going to read one more section so you get a sense of some of the action in the novel. And so Joe is an ex-Marine, ex-FBI agent who specializes in the exfiltration of young children who've been taken into the world of sex trafficking. And so he's been hired to find this young girl who's at a brothel on 48th Street. And he's been waiting outside the brothel. And then this guy leaves the brothel who's like the towel boy who runs errands. And so Joe has grabbed him, and he's in the car with him, interrogating him, which is where I'll pick up. And just two things from the language of this world. Such a place that has children in this world of this book is called a playground, and the children, the person that looks after them is called the big sister. And so, so Joe is in the back seat of his car with this guy, Paul. Joe, having gotten all the information he wanted, closed his hand once more around Paul's throat and the carotid artery that led to his brain. Paul's eyes widened at the betrayal, and Joe counted to 10. These 10 seconds seemed rubbery and strange to Joe. Looking at Paul's face, he had a vision of sorts. He saw Paul entering a bar, catching his reflection in the glass of the door, and quickly running his fingers through his hair, since he never liked how he looked, and how Paul felt in that moment, without being able to put words to it, that everything in his life seemed to fall short. Then Paul was asleep, not dead, and Joe lowered him down gently across the back seat, checking his pulse and his breathing. He smoothed Paul's hair, as Paul had in the vision, and like a god, he looked at Paul with tenderness. He imagined Paul's little apartment somewhere, his mean, unmade bed, his private place where he worried over himself, where he went to hide like an animal. Joe knew that all human beings are the star of their own very important film, a film in which they are both camera and actor, a film in which they're always playing the fearful and lonely hero who gets up each day hoping to finally strike upon the life they are meant to lead, though they never do. He then taped Paul's head and neck to the seat and put tape over his mouth, cutting a little slit for breathing. He bent Paul's knees and taped his legs, his heels to the back of his thighs, like he was roping a piece of cattle. He didn't want Paul to wake up and make a fuss, kicking at the window. Then Joe got out of the car. It was time to get the girl, and Paul had given him the layout of the house and the security. Joe came through the front door of the brothel as the guard from the kitchen came into the hall, having seen Joe on the monitor. He didn't reach for his gun, which was a mistake. He was big, 6'5", a linebacker's body. He was about 20 feet from Joe. "Who the fuck are you?" he asked. His meaty head was shaved. It was gleaming and ugly. Joe sprinted at him, the hammer raised. The guard, scared by the hammer and scared by Joe, fumbled for his gun, and Joe was on him. The hammer struck him on the cheek, on the neck, and in the center of his back, where he felt it deep in his lungs as he went down. Joe then kicked him on the side of his pink, razor-nicked head. Joe was good at damaging people without killing them. He'd been in the house less than 10 seconds. The stairway was to his right. He took it 2 steps at a time, and the second guard, a squat and powerfully built black man, appeared at the top of the stairs, mystified by the noises that had come from below. Joe came right at him with the hammer, backing him up, and hit him on his collarbone, snapping it. The guard stumbled back into the hallway, and Joe, swinging the hammer like a baseball bat, sent it into the man's breastplate, and he went down. Joe kicked him in the head, and he was out. Then a John, in pants but no shirt, emerged from the bedroom closest to the fallen guard, and Joe hit him in the shoulder with the hammer, crumpling him. Then he kicked him hard in the stomach to keep him quiet for a while. The man, like a bug trying to swim, scratched at the floor in agony. No one else emerged from the second-floor bedrooms, so Joe took the stairs to the 3rd floor. He wasn't worried about any of the Johns or the prostitutes making cell phone calls. At all times, even when not working, Joe carried a jammer in his pocket. They were cheap, only $150, and blocked cell phone reception in a 20-yard radius. He had started using them when he moved back in with his mother. He liked to ride the bus sometimes on Queens Boulevard and stare out the window, but he couldn't stand listening to everyone on their phones. He went to the playground, per Paul's instructions, and opened the door. In the glow from the hallway, he saw a man's back, like an enormous white tumor. It was grotesque, arched, and pistoning. He could make out the girl's ankles on either side of the man's fatty white thighs, but that was all he could see of her. The man turned, looked at Joe, his eyes full of rage. How dare he be disturbed? He was paying good money for this. And Joe struck him in the face with the hammer, knocking him off the girl and sending him sprawling. Joe then grabbed the man by the arm, tossed him to the floor, and sent his steel-toed boot into his testicles, exploding at them. Then he kicked him in the head to stop his screams. The girl was lying inert on the bed, her head to the side, her lips moving. Her legs were still open. She looked like a torn-apart doll. Joe leaned his face close to hers to make a positive ID and to hear what she was whispering. It was barely audible, but she was counting. She was in the 700s. Her eyes were open but glazed. Then her big sister, a skinny diet pill blonde wearing a silk robe, came into the room. She saw the bloody, unconscious man on the floor, his groin looking like an animal that's been skinned. "What's going on?" she asked, inanely, hysterically. Joe, seeing that she carried no weapon, advanced on her, grabbed her elbow violently, and said, "Get her dressed, fast." He saw clothing on a chair, a Catholic schoolgirl's outfit, a tawdry cliché. The big sister was in shock, but she got the girl out of bed and into her skirt and blouse and panties, not bothering with the white stockings or little black shoes. Joe took a sheet from the bed, wrapped the girl in it, and carried her past the men he had left on the ground, down the 2 flights of stairs, and out of the brothel. At the top of the stoop, he peered up and down the street. No cop cars. With the girl light in his arms, he moved quickly to his rental. About 6 minutes had passed since Joe had gone in. He put the girl in the front seat. She was out of it, but not completely. He dragged Paul out of the car and left him on the sidewalk. He dropped the bloody hammer in a sewer, started the car, and headed for the W Hotel. He glanced at the girl. Her face was against the window. Her lips were moving. She was still counting. It's her way to get through it, Joe thought. She counts until it's over. So that's all I'll read from the book.